Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum and I'm here today at RIA taking a look at a Smith & Wesson Baby Russian. This is the first pattern of .38 Smith & Wesson revolver introduced by Smith & Wesson. In fact, they actually developed the cartridge first and then designed this pistol around it. Now, the early Smith & Wesson compact revolvers were very old style. They were some of the very first guns that Smith & Wesson made, and they were actually a break action revolver, but they tipped up at the barrel. So in the front of the cylinder, the barrel tipped up. It was a kludgy system, which is understandable because it was one of the very first cartridge revolvers ever developed. But Smith & Wesson would go on to work on developing the .44 caliber guns, the American models and then the Russian models. And by the mid-1870s, they took what they had learned doing that and rolled it into a much improved civilian pocket revolver, and that would be the .38. So the .44 caliber guns were quite large compared to these guys. This is not suitable for stuffing in a pocket. They wanted something that would be. So let's take a look at this, and you'll see very quickly why it was called the Baby Russian. So here we have an actual Russian model along with the #2 quote-unquote Baby Russian, and you can see, well, the differences are obvious, but I'm going to point out a couple specific things. For one, we have the ejector mechanism right here under the barrel, very similar in style. These worked the same. The hammer styles are basically identical. The sights are basically identical. We'll take a closer look at the sights in a moment. But both of these, well, obviously they're very similar guns. They took the .44 and they used that experience to develop the .38 caliber gun. As I alluded to earlier, Smith & Wesson actually developed the cartridge for this before they developed the gun itself. It is a slightly tapered case based on some of their experience developing their .44 caliber cartridges. It was, of course, originally black powder, and ballistically it threw a 146 grain bullet at about 740 feet per second. This made it actually a little bit weaker than the contemporary Colt cartridges, both the .38 Colt short and .38 Colt long. But not by a whole lot, and that level of distinction among ballistics was probably not that important to a lot of consumers, and frankly, a lot of them probably didn't even recognize it. Just, I want a .38 caliber revolver, and well, it's .38 Colt versus a .38 Smith & Wesson. They would continue to use a spur hammer design on the first two versions of this. There would be 3 total versions, and we'll get into all 3 in a moment. This offers some advantages for pocket carry, which is how a lot of these would have been carried. With a single action revolver, there's no risk of discharge as long as the hammer's down. So you don't necessarily need a trigger guard, as anathema as that idea is to us today. Once it's cocked, then the trigger is usable. To open this up, of course, this is a top break revolver, and we have the exact same sort of frame latch here that you would have on larger .44 caliber guns. Now, the way the extractor works is it automatically lifts up, kicks all of your cases out, whether they're loaded or not, and when you fully open the gun, the extractor snaps back in. Now, the way that works is a catch here on these gear teeth in the barrel assembly. Now, if I open this, if I hold this lever down, you can see I can actually disconnect it from the extractor, and I can open the gun without ejecting all the cartridges. So if I just want to open it because, say, I want to pull one cartridge out, or I want to load one extra cartridge, if I don't want everything in the cylinder dumping out, I can actually do that, which is a nice little feature. The rear sight is minuscule. It's this little tiny V notch back there. Again, this is the same as on the .44 caliber cavalry pistol, which is a little surprising. The sight picture for that is very skimpy. For a pocket gun, this is probably more likely used at a sort of instinctively point it sort of range. We have manufacturer's marks and more substantially patent dates up there on the top of the barrel. Nothing particularly surprising. Now, these guns went into production in 1876. They would make a total of about 25,500 of the first pattern, and this is serial number 23. very, very early, and that allows us to see something pretty cool. About the first 100 guns made had an extra screw right there that engaged an extra safety device called the Aldrich device, or Aldrich patent. And the idea was it was a little plunger so that if the hammer was cocked, you couldn't open the action. And it was intended to be a safety mechanism so that you couldn't fire the thing when it was unlocked. Now, they very quickly decided that they actually didn't want to include that, and I'm not entirely sure why. Probably a combination of it caused some sort of issue, and also they decided that it wasn't actually necessary. Like I said, about 25,500 of this, the first variation. The second variation, they would modify the design of the extractor, and they would shorten this underlug substantially. And that would be the second pattern. That would get the majority of the sales. Over 100,000 of the second pattern were made. And then there was also a third pattern where they replaced the spur trigger with a traditional trigger and trigger guard. That one sold about as well as the first, another 28,000 guns of the third style. What's kind of interesting is when they transitioned away from the spur trigger, there were still areas where people really preferred the spur trigger. If you think about it, this has a lot less, takes up a lot less space than a full trigger guard, especially on a compact gun like this. And if you're not concerned about it as a safety issue, because you only have a single action hammer anyway, if you're going to stuff this in a pocket, there are some valid reasons to want a spur trigger. And what Smith & Wesson did is, once they introduced the version with the full trigger guard, they actually offered a retrofit kit that they called the Mexican kit, and they would continue to offer this as a factory-built gun with a spur trigger under the name of the Mexican model, because it was particularly in Mexico where the spur trigger was desirable and more frequently ordered. But you could actually remove the trigger guard, which was a separate component, and remove the trigger and replace them with a couple, basically a set of parts that would turn it into a spur hammer gun, which is kind of an interesting retrofit kit. In total, of just the single-action guns, Smith & Wesson would produce more than 160,000 of these by the time production ended in 1911. They also, of course, had a double-action 38 caliber revolver, but that's a different system for a whole different video. The cartridge would live on well beyond that because the British military would end up adopting the 38 Smith & Wesson cartridge as the 38/200, and they would use it in their Enfield and Webley 38 caliber revolvers all the way through World War II. So really quite a long legacy for a relatively early cartridge. Started out as black powder. Anyway, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.